In this episode, I'm going to be talking with Sarah Pant, who is someone I've worked closely with at the Clinical Psychedelic Research Lab at Monash University. She is a fellow psychedelic-assisted psychotherapist. And in this conversation, we get into some depth about the psychotherapy aspects of our work and really talk about what we're actually doing in the room with our clients. We talked for a long time, so this is a shortened version, and I may make the longer episode available on subscription at a later date. So shoot me a message if you think that's something you would be interested in. Sarah is a clinical psychotherapist with nearly 20 years of experience in mental health across Australia and the UK. At Monash University's Clinical Psychedelic Lab, she was a core therapist and a trainer in the world's first trial looking at Psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy for generalised anxiety disorder. And she now serves as a clinical supervisor on the trial exploring MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. Sarah's therapeutic approach weaves together somatic practices, creative arts, eco-psychotherapy, systems thinking, and process-orientated psychology. Her holistic perspective of health and well-being is deeply rooted in fostering human connection, exploring altered states of consciousness, and enhancing our connection with the living world. So let's get into it. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Hey, Sarah, welcome to Be on the Trip.
Hi, Esme. It's nice to be here. It's lovely to see you.
Yeah, so lovely. And thank you so much for agreeing to come and talk with me today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I've been looking forward to it for a while. And obviously, you and I know each other through our work. So we worked together at Monash University with on the trial for when we were working with psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy to treat anxiety disorder. And actually, you and I have known each other kind of professionally before that as well. So it's been quite a long time. And I'm really excited to get into this topic with you today.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
The conversation we're going to be having today is really about the underpinning of why I decided to do this podcast in the first place. And we're going to be getting into a bit of detail about what is the psychotherapy part of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. There's a lot of talk in the media that focuses in on the dosing sessions with the medicine. And actually, you and I know from our work that it's much more of it's a psychotherapy process with medicine to enhance or deepen, or some people use the word augment that process. And so part of the whole reason for me starting Beyond the Trip was to kind of talk with all these interesting people about that. And you were one of the people I really wanted to speak to.
Yeah, I'm really delighted to have this conversation. I've been looking forward to it too. And it's just nice to have the time with you as well. I think there's something really really wonderful for me to be able to connect with you with this time and this space and to explore this topic, which is, I think, really alive and interesting for us both. Yeah, I mean, how I came to be here is, I guess there's a little bit of a pattern in my working life, maybe my life too, I don't know, where I sort of get thrown in the deep end a bit with things. So, to be in this work, I think, is a surprise to me from 7 years ago. I was, I've been working as a therapist for almost 2 decades and in lots of different programs or in private practice, lots of different environments, lots of different client groups. And I came into this work really by invitation. Somebody, one of our colleagues, Sean O'Carroll, said, I'm doing this work. Would you be interested? And there was this part of me that just said yes. And I didn't really know what I was saying yes to, if I'm honest. I kind of knew the concept. I knew roughly what it was, but I psychedelic-assisted therapy wasn't something that was on my radar. Really in Australia at that time, there was no opportunity to do it. So nobody was doing it. I'd heard of people sort of being interested in what was happening overseas, but that was the extent of my knowledge. And I remember coming into the first trial that I joined and came into a training, and everyone was talking about the books they'd read, and this person, that person. And I sat there thinking, I don't know any of these people. I haven't read anything at all.
Yes.
Yeah, but I guess there's of course there's another story there. It's not like I just landed in this with absolutely, no reason behind it. And I guess now I can look back and I can recognize what perhaps led to that invitation, which is that my work had already been something that was very experiential, had a sense of journeying within it, through various different programs or modalities. And I guess exploring altered states. I'd worked a lot with people who were in altered states of various kinds. And even the modality that I use, it kind of it has this further from consciousness exploration to it, which is like a slight altered state when you go into that place of the parts that don't make sense or that your brain can't make sense of or can't know. So
exactly.
It's a pleasure, but also I don't feel I can take responsibility for you for you being part of it. That's just you and all that you are.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it, maybe it will become clearer as we go through our conversation today around the kind of ways that you and I work that I think both feel like quite a natural fit for this work as well. The way that I work as a therapist is a lot about kind of getting people into their body and going quite deep into states that feel a little bit altered anyway. And so we'll talk a bit about that. What actually is psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy? And so perhaps before we get into that in a little bit more detail, it might be helpful for me, just for anyone who's listening who isn't aware of the actual process, to just explain a little bit about the flow of a psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy kind of piece of work. And so just briefly, I'm not going to get into huge amounts of detail about this, but when we're working with psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, we work with someone for preparation sessions. In the trials that we've worked on together, there's usually about 3 of those. And then we would do a dosing with Psilocybin or MDMA or another psychedelic medicine, and then 3 integration sessions or 2 or 3 integration sessions after that. And then there's another dosing session. And then for us, there's another 3 integration sessions usually. And that can change, and it depends, what trial you're talking about or what kind of treatment clinic you're working with. And that I think it's as we move into clinical use, one of the great things about that is we can really tailor things a bit more than on a trial as well.
Yeah.
But we'll talk a bit about what those kind of stages are for, really, in a bit more detail later. But just so that people are aware, there's kind of those 3 main phases of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. And that prep is really about getting somebody ready, preparation for the dosing session. And that sounds simple, and sometimes maybe some of those sessions might just be, in some treatment arcs, quite kind of a lot of psychoeducation, but there's also a lot of other stuff that happens in that. And so that's kind of part of what I want to get into today, like what's the psychotherapy part of prep and integration as well. Anything you want to add there, Sarah?
Well, I think the structure is helpful. I mean, I think one of the things I realized in the work in trials is how, the way this is being talked about in the media, this work can lead people to believe that this is a medicine that does a thing. And of course it is a medicine that does a thing. Yeah. But the thing is not, it's not like Panadol. It's not like you have a headache and you take Panadol and it goes away, although there can be elements of that. But I think this is where I find I'm really fascinated by the way this work meets with our kind of Western culture, and sort of the dominant culture in Australia, and I know in other places too. But this idea that medicine is something you use to fix something else, that there's something wrong and you try and fix it. Now that has its place, don't get me wrong. You break your leg, you want it to heal up in a certain way and be supported in a certain way. But I think when it comes to it comes to someone's psyche, emotional health, their well-being, working with trauma, this medicine can go some way to do some of that. But there's a bit of a misunderstanding, I think, out there that this is about the medicine. This process, in my mind, is about connection, human beings, and that is facilitated through therapy. That healing is facilitated through therapy, and the medicine supports and deepens, and in a lot of cases will accelerate that process. But it's not the medicine alone. This is not like we just kind of give them a little pat, as they go off and then say, oh, well, did it work or did it not? It is really a therapeutic process that is supported by a really incredible set of medicines that really open the doorway and to a lot of opportunities and possibilities. But the work of the therapy is bringing some understanding to that, grounding that, unfolding that. Sometimes it's confusing or doesn't make sense, and also offering connection through that process that, where we are beings of belonging, we're community animals, and we're meant to be, we're not meant to be, healing alone is not, it misses a vital part of what it is to be human and what we really need. And so that feels very important to me in this work, is that we don't miss the fact that the connection, the time, the facilitation, the therapy is the medicine, as much the medicine as the medicine, as the psychedelic medicine.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think, it's so important what you were just speaking about the fact that we are relational beings, and so much of our suffering is caused by us experiencing distress and feeling alone with it. And so one of the things that I think is so powerful about psychotherapy in general, but even more kind of in this work, is that there are people that travel alongside you, those psychotherapists that are there to be with you if things get tough in the dosing session, and to support you before and after, and to help you to really meet with yourself, but with support there and with that holding. And so that feels like a really important part of this process to me.
Definitely. I kind of, I notice that a lot of the questions I get in certain circles about this work is, how do we make it more cost effective? That's the first, how do we make this cheaper?
Yeah.
And I get where it comes from, and I do think there's an important question about access, which is a whole conversation to itself, and really important, and I think that, they are conversations that we're having as, within the teams that we work in and that matter to us. However, that question about how can we make this cheaper when it comes to community work is, the first thing really that comes to my mind is, well, what's the cost of reducing the cost? What are you actually losing here? And that to me is really important, and especially within a medical system that, really it's looking to, as much as possible, roll out solutions en masse, with start here, take this, end there. And again, that has its place, and I understand why it exists in that way. But I think we, there is a risk of saying, well, let's just make it cheaper. We cut a bit of this, cut a bit of that. And what you actually lose over time is the connection, is the time, is the honoring of someone's inner process of healing, which is a complex process and often coming from wounds that have happened, either many years ago or over many years, or both, and to think that we can just sort of fix that, in a quick way. And what is, time is very varied depending on the person, I think, in terms of what healing looks like. It can happen fast, but it also, I'd be very wary of reducing the human connection element and the facilitation and the therapy element. And then there's just that thing of psychedelic experience and therapy itself. When you really go deep in therapy, this is people doing the hardest stuff often that they ever have to do in their lives. They're facing the darkest, most awful parts of their experience, or parts of themselves that they feel are, just unforgivable or whatever it might be, you know. And I think it I've been reading this wonderful book who's written by an academic and he's also a mountaineer and a poet, really. And I was thinking about mountaineering. You wouldn't go mountaineering. I wouldn't go mountaineering, even though I'm quite comfortable in nature and quite comfortable going camping, things like that. I'm not going to go mountaineering, really difficult terrain, without knowing that I've got guides with me who understand that terrain, who know the signs of, the weather's changing here. We're going to make this decision or go this way, in order to be safe in doing this. Let's put these things around us here. I wouldn't do that. That to me seems like I'd be putting myself in a really tricky position, Yeah. And I think it's the same with therapy, like these are extremely challenging places that people go, and it's confusing territory if you've not been there before. And I think often it's territory we all avoid these difficult places, this uncomfortable or distressing experience. We all kind of don't want to go there. And so if we're having to go there, then it's important to have people that understand that terrain and know how to navigate it. And I'd also say that's true of like beautiful experience, like really, really beautiful, blissful, heart expanding experience that you can have on psychedelics can be equally overwhelming, just in a really different way. And I think to have, again, people that understand those places that can support you to get a grasp of what it is and how to be there in a way that's not completely overwhelming, but that is actually supportive and connected and transferable into life, and so for me there's just such a value. There's so much value in therapy that I would feel very concerned actually if we tried to cut that out because it's cheaper.
Yeah, absolutely.
And forgive me for carrying on this track, but I'm like, we're right on something I'm so excited, like so kind of passionate about and interested in. But I think, if you look at mental health conditions across the board, there is this disconnection. There's a disconnection from self or experience or relationship or the world, and so how do we reconnect? And part of that is in relationship. It is our natural inclination. It's the healthiest way of being. You look at any of the statistics on isolation or on connection and community and who fares better. And I think we're also kind of starving for that in our culture, and we're heading further and further down the road of disconnection in many ways. And I think and quicker, faster, more, as opposed to let's slow this down. Let's really be together. Let's really notice the quality of that connection. And that might be difficult at times. Don't get me wrong. It can be hard for people to be in at times with themselves or with their therapist. But even that act of staying in that challenge is something quite profound, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, so much of what psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy does is about helping people to connect more deeply to themselves and to others. And that's also what therapy should do. And it really, the idea of it, the clues in the phrase, like psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. And I think you're right. Like, so much of the media has focused on the kind of medicine sessions or the dosing sessions that people have kind of lost. There's not a solid understanding around the therapy part of it, I don't think, which is why we're here. And I think, and if I was to think about what we're doing in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, we're accompanying someone on that journey of meeting with themselves, but also accompanying them on that journey of potentially often of then taking that out into the world to connect with the people around them and to kind of reconnect with nature, to reconnect with other people, important people in their lives. And that's what integration is all about.
That's right.
We can get it. Yeah. And I think, it's so, I really think access is an important issue, and I'm definitely going to do a podcast where we talk about that. But I think we really do need to get clear about what it is that we would lose if we were to make it cheaper. Shall we go back a little bit into
Sure.
preparation psychotherapy sessions a little bit and get
Mm.
into a little bit of kind of maybe go into a little bit of detail about what is the psychotherapy aspects of those sessions, knowing that you and I
Mm.
probably do it slightly differently. And we've actually never sat in a room together because on the Monash
Yeah.
trial, obviously, we have a male and female dyad usually. And you and I have never had the fortune to work together. I hope it happens at some point. I would love
Me
that.
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love that too.
Ellen, but what is it that what are we doing in preparation ready for the dosing? And I think it'll be really interesting to have this conversation and see what we're doing
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
similar or different, right?
Mm.
I think there's a lot of, there's quite a bit of information out there about the general things that preparation sessions should do, which is to create
Yes.
a feeling of safety for the client and to help them to understand what the dosing sessions will be like. So there is a psychoeducation element always.
Mm.
And from the moment, one of the most important things you're doing in any psychotherapy, and especially this, is you're creating safety in the relationship. So you're allowing the person to feel as safe as they can with you, and ready for the dosing and with themselves.
Mm.
But I think if I think more in depth around the modalities that I'm trained in and how I'm using them,
Mm-hmm.
well, I guess as a somatic therapist, where we kind of start with the body, one of the first things I'm doing when I meet someone is I'm tracking their body, tracking where how they're sitting. I'm tracking my own body's responses because as
Mm-hmm.
a somatic therapist and someone whose body is kind of a primary channel to use, I feel a lot in my body and I use that as information in the space.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and to kind of see how the client might be traveling or what might be coming up for them.
As in
And
you name it directly, Esme?
it depends. Yeah,
Yeah.
it depends. It depends on the phase. So I would,
Mm.
if I had a strong feeling in my body, I may name it directly.
Mm.
And if I felt like sometimes I might get like, I feel a lot of tightness in my stomach for someone. I might say
Mm-hmm.
something like, "Oh, I'm feeling a lot of tightness in my belly."
Mm.
Are you feeling that, or is this, and I think that's, it can be useful. But sometimes
Yeah.
I'm just using it to track kind of how I'm going and how they're going.
Mm.
I
Mm-hmm.
might not
Mm-hmm.
initially to bring it up with them, but in the initial prep sessions, I might get them to notice where they feel different emotions in their body or how emotions might show up in their body.
Mm.
And that can be really tricky for a lot of people. Some people it's really easy. So again, I'm kind of looking at the different ways that I work and tailoring it to the person sat in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
And but I'm getting them to kind of see where the different emotions show up in their body. I might ask them to practice sitting with that just to see how they go with our support into going into some of those places, knowing that it's likely or possible that some emotions will show up in their body during the dosing session. So I'm kind of getting into that kind of teaching space a little bit, or that kind of giving them some skills that might be helpful in dosing.
Mm-hmm.
But probably as well as doing that, one of the most important things that we're doing is we're kind of getting to know them and them getting to know us too, and to feel safe and to kind of come up with a collaborative understanding of why they're here. What's brought them here?
Mm-hmm.
What's the reasons for their distress right now? What are they wanting to get out of this process? And, in psychology, we have different words for that. We call it maybe like a formulation, and that can be quite different to the medical model diagnostic label that someone might have when they come in. Because a lot of people come in, and they say that I'm here because I've got anxiety disorder in our trial, for example. But what I'm really interested in is where that comes from. What are the reasons for that distress? And so we might
Mm-hmm.
start to explore a little bit of that in a gentle way that does go slowly, and getting to know what that's like for them to go and to try to understand some of those places.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then the parts work kind of comes in, and I might be getting to know the ways that they protect themselves from the pain that they're feeling in their body or their emotional distress. and what they're in. We like to craft out intentions for the process of the psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. So what do they want to get out of it? And
Yeah.
that's very much kind of an important part of the process as well. Does that
Mm.
make, yeah, I don't know. What about you? That's a
Very
lot. That's
similar.
so much
I
more,
say I
I'd say.
say
Yeah.
very similar. Yeah, and I think this is the challenge, right? And again, that question of like what actually happens.
Yeah.
I think part of the challenge of describing that is that there are so many facets to the what is actually happening in the room. It's quite
Yeah.
tricky to kind of name all of them, right? And be in a concise way. It's like,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, all of that sounds very familiar. I think that's very much what I've done in with my co-therapist. I kind of think of it a bit like that prep is preparing for the outer journey, which is all of that sort of logistics. Okay, we're heading towards dose day. You're here. This is the rhythm of the protocol, the treatment that you'll be going through. We'll be meeting at these frequencies, and dose day will look a bit like this. And what do you know about psychedelics, and how do you feel about it? Preparing kind of that's all the practical stuff. It's like when I worked in the bush adventure therapy or the wilderness therapy program, we'd do the same thing. We'd pack our bags and we'd make food and dehydrate it, and we'd get out the map and be like, okay, well, this is where we'll be walking, and and so it's really similar in my mind. There's a sort of practical, almost logistical element to it, but it also includes things like psychoed and answering questions or making it less mysterious, and supporting people to feel comfortable practically and be ready as best they can. And then there's the inner journey, there's which is all those things you were naming about, well, what are you coming in with? And that might be about supporting someone to feel they can land in the space in whatever way possible, and feel safe enough to be there. And depending on what you're working with and who you're working with, what you're working with in terms of the client group, so a diagnostic might mean that's a little easier or a lot more difficult. So obviously people coming in with trauma or complex trauma, that can be quite a process even to feel safe in enough in a room with themselves and with people. It can be that tender, that really really sort of it's tender and holding really gently and really carefully. And with other people, they come in, they're more comfortable, but they're still dealing with a lot inside that's brought them there. And so, whatever supports that process, I think. And of course, looking for, in a way, it is like the internal map, like you were describing. It's like, well, what's the territory here? And how might we begin to traverse that? Now, that's not all written. It's just like, I think it's a bit like this. And again, depending on the client, it may be really useful to be sharing some of that with them, or to sort of, some people find that really helpful, and other people just aren't ready for it or just don't find it that helpful.
Exactly.
And so it's just being responsive as a therapist in that, around like, well, is this, for this person, what would be the most helpful? And sometimes it's really state-based. There might not even be heaps of words. They may not want to share a lot about the details of what they've experienced, or, it's more about, I find that question of like, what if this were to go really well, what might it be like for you at the other end, and getting a sense of the state that they're seeking, the internal state, what that might that be like. And even if there's no content around that, just, wow, if I was free of this, just to begin to imagine that possibility, I think can be really useful, because often it's that state can be really helpful in some ways as a practice, if that makes sense, like as a practice to lead in. Yeah.
I think that's that idea around state based, and just really meeting someone where you're at. I think you used those words earlier. Meeting somebody where they are at is so important. And I think we're part of the challenge of thinking, how do we describe the black box of therapy, is that we're not doing the same thing every time, of course. And it really depends on, for some people, they'll be they have a really good idea of what they want to work on. And for other people, that will take some support and some crafting and some reflecting. And we always encourage people, don't we, to journal outside of sessions and to reflect on the process that they're going through, if that feels like the right thing for them too.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I guess the other thing with the psychoed that we're doing is we're giving people some of the tools, aren't we, to help them navigate
Absolutely.
those days. It's like when you go hiking, you know, you take a map and you take, you know, you might take a compass, and we can't give them a map to the psychedelic journey as such, but we can give them things like tools to help them feel calm and regulated, and that's going to be different for everybody. And so we might practice some of those in preparation as well to get them ready for dosing.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot that happens, isn't there?
There's a lot. And I feel like actually, you know, just to say as a caveat that we're not going to get through all of that information around all of the things that we're doing today either. Because it depends on the person, and that would be like a whole training course. But I think
that's right.
Yeah. And I think it's really helpful just to name a few, like we have been.
Yeah, I think so. And that there's, you know, there's different levels to the experience that is happening. So again, there's, you know, so yes, it might be, I'm just overcome by this particular feeling all the time. And so then it might be a settling that enough so that I can be ready enough, you know, or it might be I need to talk about my history and work a bit with this, or parts work, or you know, any of these things we're naming. And then there's these different levels to experience. So there's sort of like what's happening in the room that is obvious, you know, like I imagine if you watch Therapy Back, you see what's obvious, but then there's this whole other level of experience of what's the atmosphere like. What does it feel like? You were talking about the fear. I work a lot with that too. You know, feel like I'm a real kind of what's that, like a weather vane kind of pick up on all the weather in the room, you know, and thinking, oh, why am I feeling that? What is that about? But, you know, there's all that information in our bodies and in the space between us, and it's much more tangible than it sounds is the other thing, you know, like I feel like there might be people listening that think, oh, this all sounds a little, but it is much more tangible than that. And I guess it's like we've used the word tracking a bit. It reminds me of tracking, you know, the tracking I hear in sort of Indigenous Australian cultures of trackers that can, you know, they can see what's happened in the landscape. They've got they can spot where a rabbit's been or a kangaroo's been or a ant or whatever it is, you know, like they've got this level of detail in observing and taking in the landscape and understanding how it's been formed in that way, or why that is, you know, that particular branch is bent in a way. And that is not magic, right? Like that's not something, it's actually a really clearly defined skill. And I think that's also what we're talking about here, is that we're tracking in a way that is very tangible. We're not sort of like just making this up. You know, there's like really tangible experiences happening in the room that we're taking note of and beginning to facilitate, or kind of just noticing sometimes, you know, I don't necessarily dive straight into facilitating because you've got to watch the pace of things too. But I think it's, you know, it's this really just noticing, okay, well, that's leaning that way, or that's feeling like that, or I wonder, I can see this thing here, but I don't know why it's there, but I know it's there, you know. So there's a bit of a just noticing aspect to this, but it is a tangible skill.
Yes, I agree.
Not as mysterious as it might sound.
No, exactly. And this is something that you and I have actually spoken about a bit, that the idea of tracking, and we've mentioned it a few times in this podcast. And I think that is one of the key skills for this work that I draw on all the time. And it's throughout the whole process, in preparation sessions, in dosing, which we can talk a little bit about in a moment, and in integration. And to give like a bit of a concrete example, you know, like a simple example might be when I asked about how school was for you, Sarah, I noticed that your shoulder moved that way to the right. And every time I mention that, your shoulder moves to the right. And I'm just curious about what that feels like for you. And that might open up a whole conversation around why that is. Or the person might be like, I have no idea that I was doing that.
Yeah.
And then that's this conversation. And that's just the simple example just to help people to understand a bit about what we mean.
Mm.
Shall we move into a little bit of about, I feel like, and to say, as I said before, we're not going to do every single, we're not going to do justice to all of the things that we do in these different stages of psychedelic assisted therapy in a short podcast. But I think it's really useful to start to name some of these. And I'm finding it so interesting talking to you about it. So when we've done the preparation, and I really like the hiking kind of analogy in terms of the practical things that we might support someone with. They're getting ready for their dosing, for their adventure, for their hike into their own body and their own soul, or whatever word they want to use for that. And then we go into dosing. And I'm particularly interested to talk about what we are doing in dose day, because often when I hear people talk about kind of making this cheaper, I've seen recently some reports around just having someone different to the therapist sitting with the person in the dose room, and not even, and so that felt a bit concerning to me, and there's good reasons why that feels concerning to me. And I think if we speak a bit about what we're doing in the dosing, that will become a bit clearer.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to start this one? What do you think?
Yeah, sure. Well, where to start, really? I'm just kind of reflecting on what do I do? I mean, it's interesting because I've heard, but if I come back to what do I do? I mean, I guess I think and even looking at, and again, it's limited knowledge that I have around the traditional uses of these medicines. But from what I know about it, these medicines are held. Well, firstly, before I speak about that, I think it's important to acknowledge those lineages and just that have been created over really thousands of years in many, many cultures around the world, Indigenous cultures largely, and that they have been created within the cultural context, as in they're held by the stories, the myths, the ecosystem, the landscape, and the spiritual beliefs of those people. And I feel like that's important to mention because I think we are needing, and rightly so, needing to, one, honor and acknowledge those lineages and be humbled by them. I think in the West we have a sense of like, oh, well, we know a lot, which we do. We know a lot, but we know a lot from this like one perspective in a way. And there's all these other perspectives that are so important in this work because these are experiences that take us to all of these aspects of being human, being in the world, being connected with nature or gods or whatever else it might take people to. And so coming from just one viewpoint for me just feels like it's going to be very limited and very reductionist. So I feel like it's important to acknowledge those lineages and those people who have such a rich holding of these experiences. And so where I see this as being important is that we're in a culture that actually doesn't have those stories, doesn't have the mythology, doesn't have this sort of spirituality or connection to these experiences in a way that supports, contains, makes sense of them. And so I think a consistent therapist can serve some of that. You create a holding of this experience. You create I hesitate to use the word ceremony because I don't know if we're fully formed in that way, but there is a ceremony, there is a sacredness. There's a sacredness to therapy. There is a sacredness to meeting someone in their rawest state, like brings tears to my eyes just talking about it. It really is, it feels like such sacred ground that we're walking on. And so I think there is something about really accompanying someone with that kind of humbling awe of this human that's unfolding in front of you and who is like traversing that mountain that they thought they might never, ever be able to climb. And I think that is something that I hold really, really precious, within that space. And so, I feel like that's where, no matter what model, no matter how we do this, that if it comes from that place, then I feel like I'm interested in it, because to me, I couldn't imagine asking someone to do that without really respecting what they're doing, what we're asking them to do. So, so I feel like that, the therapists in the room hold that through dosing, and sometimes that is practical, making sure there's a practical sort of physical body element, making sure you have water and, you can get to the toilet, or you can move and be comfortable, or, move with your discomfort, or stretch, or whatever people might want to do. And there's a very kind of basic human thing to it, and I know therapeutic touch is talked about a lot in this work, and the ethics of it and all of these things. And all I'll say about that is, I think if you've got a sound consent process, then it is a really deeply human way of connecting. And it's, in a way, it's really simple. If there's the trust there, having that kind of, someone holding your hand when you're scared, or when you are challenged, or when you are going to places you've never been before, that to me feels so natural and so supportive. So there's sort of simple ways of supporting that happens in dose room. And then I think there's also something about like holding the presence, holding the atmosphere, holding the awareness of some things. Often as a therapist, I mean, I don't know about you, as me, but I get a lot of information in my body, but I don't have a clue what's going on a lot of the time, unless people are very talkative and dosing, which can happen. But but sometimes people say nothing, and you just, so I guess I go into quite a meditative state. I feel like I'm in something of an altered state. I'm very present in the room, but I start to pay attention to the information that I can pick up on if there are no words, so feelings in my body, or a particular way someone might be moving, or an expression on their face, or the atmosphere in the room. And just, again, it comes back to that tracking, right? Like there's that sort of tracking process that I'm doing through that, of like, what is this? What am I picking up in this landscape that someone's traversing right now, that I'm accompanying them on? And and so it and then other dose days, there's more kind of like muscular therapeutic work that might come into it if somebody needs it, which at times they do, but they don't always. So it's, I guess, moving between these things, chatting with people if they need it, sometimes really working with if they need it, and sometimes it's very sort of simple awareness, tracking, presence, honoring, being responsive. That's how I approach dose day.
Thank you. And also thank you for naming the really important and honouring the really important piece around Indigenous use of these medicines and all over the world, and that actually when they're used in that way, there is so many layers with which we can't and shouldn't be trying to replicate in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. And that's what we're talking about today. And there's so much knowledge and wisdom from those spaces that that we ideally, hopefully, one at some stages kind of learn from and work together, but also that we are not trying to replicate that. And really acknowledging that that is a very long history and a very important history. And something I think,
like with roots down into the ground in which they walk, right? Like it's not, you can't sort of uproot that and try and plant it over here. It just doesn't, I mean,
Yeah.
there are elements, right? We can definitely learn from it, and with the, and as you say, collaborate and work with and integrate these ways of working and knowing and being. I think that is beautiful and important. But the idea of saying, oh, well, I just think it doesn't, there's a translation piece. There's a translation piece with deep respect for any of those traditions, but it's got to be, we've got to embed this within where we are and where we're coming from and the reality of this place and time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I resonate a lot with all of the things you were saying about dosing. It's sometimes it feels very meditative, and it's all, you're in deep presence with that person, with your co-therapist. So, the way that you and I work is there are two therapists in the room, and usually a male and female, although not always actually. And I feel like I'm sitting in presence with the client or the person in front of me, my own body, and I'm tracking my co-therapist as well to see how they're going. And sometimes we're in there doing a lot, supporting someone if they're feeling stuck or they need that human kind of connection. And other times they're way outside of the verbal and somatic, and they might not even be so aware of us in the room.
Yes.
And then we're really just sitting in that meditative space. And that idea of co-regulation or kind of interpersonal grounding feels really important as well, that we might like take their hand, like you said, or put a hand on their shoulder. And one of the things I say a lot is that we are with you. Like just we are here for you. Today is all about supporting you to have this experience, and we're here with you. And so much of suffering, it wasn't like that for someone. They were left alone with their pain.
Yeah.
And if it gets tough, we're here. And if it's beautiful, we're here too.
Yeah.
Because that can also, like you were saying before, that can be such an important thing in terms of how to help someone hold all of that. Yeah, I'm feeling emotional now too. We're both going to get to this work. It really
but I think this is the truth of it, right? Like there's a part of me that feels a little shy about being emotional about it, but at the same time, this is the truth of it. Like this is the truth of being human, and there's something very, I don't know, I feel something when you say we are with you. Like that is. There's something very moving about that. And that is very much the role, right? Just to be with in all its simplicity, beauty, and complexity, and like pain and awe and joy and bliss and distress and confusion. And, I mean, that's life. That is being human. That is, the truth of moving through the world for all of us. And let's hope we never lose that, right? Like let's hope we never lose that sense of being able to be with someone or have someone with us in those moments in our lives. Like it's sort of so simple and so complex and and really, it is. I find it really, it's an emotional, we are emotional beings. That's we are. And for good reason. That is partly how we connect and how we work together and how we find our way through things,
Absolutely. So I think so much suffering comes from, like, we have so many ways in which we protect ourselves from pain. And sometimes that means that we lose touch with those emotional parts of us that are really signals for how we could, for things that we might want to do in the world, or how we might want to connect, or what doesn't feel okay. And I think so much of this work is about reconnecting people to that.
Yeah. And also the thing is, it's like once that healing happens, like once somebody is able to work through that pain or distress or whatever it is they're carrying, like it's like those feelings are the aliveness. They're the thing that you're like, oh, I'm feeling again, and I'm feeling a range of things again, and I feel alive. I feel alive, and I feel connected to myself and the people around me, and to the world, like, isn't that amazing? Like, the sky is there, whatever it is. There's this sort of beautiful wonder and awe at being alive and being in the world. And I think that's what, we can carry on as we are, but we lose something if we're carrying on in that, that sort of disconnected place. We're losing something. We're losing, like, the aliveness. We're losing the wonder and the joy and the awe of this incredible experience we're having, And so I think, I think the emotions are, you can't sort of, you can't not do them when it comes to this work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's kind of making me think of something that I think is also a really important message that I kind of want to convey about this work, is that, so much of our kind of general way of helping people with mental health issues or distress can be about like medicating to kind of reduce symptoms, or
yes, yeah.
And that has its place, don't get me wrong, but in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, the big feelings can come up, in the dosing, but also afterwards, as people start to get reconnected to their emotions, it can feel big. It can feel like they haven't been in those spaces for a long time. And it's also a really healthy part of healing, is to reconnect back to those emotional states. And so it can be quite like surprising to the people around a person who's been through this, that they might be more tearful, or they might be experiencing great joy and then feeling sad, and that's actually a normal part of this process, and it's a normal part of being human as well.
It is. It is.
Should we talk a little bit about integration?
And
the aftermath, and that, because
a little bit about a little bit about that tiny thing called integration.
Now, that's not there, right? And I think something that I would want to say is, I know we've gone a bit over time, but that's totally fine. We'll just keep going. Let's just keep going. And so let's talk a little bit then about integration. And that one of the first things that comes up for me is that in this work, it's healing is a long-term process, and psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, and any kind of psychotherapy, in my opinion, and the healing takes place over long periods of time. And so, in the trial that you and I worked on at Monash, we worked with people for around 3 months of kind of those face-to-face sessions, but we were very clear with people that this unfolding of this healing process doesn't stop when we finish working, that it happens over many, many months and sometimes years for people, that the psychedelic experience and the therapy will continue to unfold after we finished. If I think about, I think that that's a really important message. And so integration is often talked about as the thing that happens in the immediate aftermath. So you have an integration psychotherapy session the next day after your dosing, and then a week or two after that, you have a few more. But it really does go for a lot longer than that. Where would you like to start in talking about integration, Sarah? Such a big topic.
It is a big topic. I think there are different stages to integration. There's integration is sort of like a catch-all word, but it actually it's a journey unto itself. And I think there's a fairly kind of commonly known quote somewhere, who I have no idea who first said it, but it's, like the journey begins at the end of the medicine. It's like you have your medicine journey, and that's where your journey really begins. Like, it's the difference between it being like going on a nice holiday and saying, oh, that was amazing, and something that actually becomes part of how, an experience that becomes part of how you are in the world in a really real, tangible way. So I think, there's the first stage of integration is this sort of immediate aftermath of the journey. Essentially like a sharing of what happened and what did you experience and what came up for you. Now, that might be details of the dose, or it might be things that then the dose has brought up in terms of relationship or myself or whatever else, my inner experience. So it's a little bit of a like gently kind of collecting those or excitedly sometimes collecting those experiences, and working with them, like what was the most curious, or what was the most mysterious, or what are you most delighted by, or what seems the most strange to you, or confusing or disturbing, or whatever it might be, and sort of seeing where the energy is within the experience. And look, a lot of people will have a lot of insight simply from the experience. So there might be a reporting on that too, and celebrating that, and even an internal shift. I think for a lot of people, and look, I've worked mainly with MDMA and with Psilocybin, and I think, different medicines are a little different here, but I think both of those medicines do seem to have a, physiological, they don't seem to, they've been studied to have a physiological impact as well. So there's sort of greater ability to be within yourself in a way that feels calmer, more steady, more connected. And so that's a really optimal place for therapy too. One is that just really being able to get to know that inner state, because that can be an incredible resource for somebody that hasn't had access to that or has never known that, to know what that feels like and to practice it. And then also from that place, then the sort of facilitation of therapy becomes a lot easier, because someone's able to be more present within themselves. And it's not just that sort of like sort of trying to support the nervous system to settle enough so that you can be in conversation, which can take, months and months and months for people to do in regular therapy. So there's this sort of beautiful place of being able to facilitate change and insight and understanding. How we do that, again, it's so varied. I think you're actually, Esme, sitting on Jung's Red Book. You are part of my little makeshift desk for today. But I think sort of when I put it there, I thought, oh, that's nice, because this is, like one of the sort of influences in a way, because I think the psychedelic experience can often be like a dream, and like a dream, there can be something really clear in it. Oh, that thing, right. Okay, I get what that's about. Or I revisited this moment, or I was in the presence of this person, or whatever it might be in that dream. And so psychedelics do that. And then like dreams, they can also be really confusing or mystifying or narrative, like, oh, I was here and then I went there and then this happened, and so I actually feel like, that Jungian dream work, of unfolding a dream and looking at the different elements. And I've need to say that's very different to those books you buy, you can buy in a shop that says, if you dream about losing your teeth, it means this, it's like very different to that. So this is about working with someone's individual experience of what meaning it has for them, and supporting them to unfold that. So it's like unfolding means getting to know, getting inside, feeling the different parts of it, seeing what associations you might make to it, or what sort of theme runs through. So it'll indicate your inner process. So what's like emerging in you. So I think some integration is like that. And then other integration, there's I think when people go through, say, a dramatic change from a psychedelic journey, there's this whole integration of like, oh, I was operating from this place in the world and now I'm here. I don't even know what that. So there can be that incredible sense of being lost. And I know more about me, and like feels more like me, but I don't know how me does this, outside thing. So the integration might be supporting that transition, actually supporting that, well, how do you have that conversation from you rather than from, whatever this was, the scaffolding that was holding you up before, the protectors or what, however you want to name them. So there might be work like that. There's so many. What else would you add?
No, that's how we could. Yeah, I think I think that there's, I really think what you were speaking about just then is really so key for a lot of people. They have, not for everyone is different, of course, but if they have this big experience, they meet with this different part of themselves, they get to know themselves on a deeper level, they process kind of
Yeah.
experiences from their life, but then they go back into their life as it was constructed before. And so
Yes.
which can be quite challenging for people. And we do, I think we all name this and we talk about this with clients and people that we're working with, and the integration, there's different, I almost see it like there's different levels of integration or different layers. There's the stuff that
Yes.
the person does with themselves. So how do they stay close to the experience that they've had, and to allow it to continue to unfold, that involves staying close to it. So kind of that might be speaking about it with their therapist and writing and journaling and meditating on aspects of it if that's their thing, or just going out into nature or whatever that looks
Yeah.
like for them. But then there's, how do they hold that with other people? How do they integrate with their immediate family members, with their communities, in the world around them? And that is also really important. And people can people's families can be quite shocked that, oh, this person is acting in a way that feels a little bit different, or the person themselves might feel like they're interacting in a way that feels different. And sometimes it can be hard to hold that new openness, and that the way that people have protected themselves in the past might start to come back. And so sometimes integration is just noticing that with a person in the long time.
Oh
And
gosh, so much of that. Yeah.
and helping them to maybe honoring the ways that they've protected themselves before, but helping them to work out, is that something that needs to continue, and how do they allow the ways they've protected themselves to kind of give them a little more space again. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Definitely. Yes, there's so much of that. Yeah, there's this natural, and again, this is a term that I've heard a lot, or this is a phrase I've heard a lot in this work, is it doesn't come from me, but this expansion and contraction. And so part of the expansion is this, this is more of who I am, what I'm doing in the world, and all of this, and free of my, potentially free of or working through my pain or my suffering. And then there's the contraction of the reality and the way these habits have formed over such a long time. They're going to come back often, usually. And then it's like, that's not a failure. That's not it not working. That's just this sort of like, ooh, okay, right. How do we now? Oh, that's that old thing again. And it might always come back. That's the other thing. I think, this idea of getting better, it's like, what does that mean? And it doesn't mean being free of experience completely. It doesn't mean being free of your trauma and that it's never painful. Of course, it's going to be painful if you think of something awful, right, that's happened to you that you've experienced, no matter how much you've worked through it. And it's the same as these sort of coping mechanisms. You're not necessarily free of them. They might come back, but then it's like, oh, there they are. They're back again.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe I'll do them for a bit because they're familiar, and it's like wearing an old coat that I love, but it's maybe doesn't suit me that well, but I'm going to keep doing it. And then it's going, well, actually, what was that other way? How do I pick up that way, that other way that I learned? And then, all right, I'm going to do that again. And yeah. I think there's a lot of that in integration. And I think that's also that thing that takes time, right?
Definitely. Yeah. And I think that's where, integration happens within a person, within a therapy dyad, so like as in with the person and their therapists, but also out in the world with their family and with their community. And I think that one of the things that I hope we can grow in Australia is spaces where people can do integration in community. And I know, what do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I was, I mean, what do I think about that? So I think integration, people go through a natural kind of progression, I think, in therapy and also in integration, right? Where there's an immediate sort of internal work that's happening. And then, as you say, it kind of goes to family, community life. And sometimes that can be bumpy and challenging. And sometimes it can be wonderful. Like it can be anything. It's like anything with psychedelics, it can be anywhere on the spectrum. But and then I also think there is this desire. I think one of the main pieces of feedback we heard in the trials that we've done at Monash was people feeling quite alone in a way at the end of it, because they didn't know other people that had had a similar experience. It was hard to talk about. They didn't always have the language for it. And this longing for connection and this longing for being able to continue integrating with others, because we are community animals, funnily enough, So I think naturally community comes into it and connection comes into it at any point. And so one thing that I've been thinking about a lot really in Australia, we don't really have the ecosystem around this work. This is, again, it comes back to that idea of in cultures where they've been working with psychedelics for a long time, there are a whole, they have an ecosystem of support around these experiences to make sense of and continue to integrate and support the change and connection with the world, from this other place. And so we don't really have that, and there's more and more people in Australia, and I know around the world, coming through trials and legal clinical experiences within the community as well. And so one of the things I've been thinking about is, well, what's needed? And there's a lot that's needed. But the one piece that I'm picking up really is around this longer term integration and what might that look like. So I have my own business called Being Found, and so Being Found is really becoming that. So offering connection points, so sharing circles where people can come and share their experience, share how they're integrating, share what's happening for them, whatever's alive really for them on the day that they come, and with other people that have been through a similar experience and facilitated by therapists. It is different to therapy too, and I don't think people need to be necessarily in therapy their whole lives. I think as therapists we're hoping that they don't need us anymore ultimately. Like that's the the idea, right? We want you to be able to go out and live your lives, and so this is not therapy. This is connection support facilitated, and at times it may also be sort of skill building. It's like, well, how do I do that, or psycho ed or whatever it is. So, and again, integration can have a lot of different skills within it. Such as mindfulness or creative practice or connection with nature or ways of thinking or journaling or whatever. There's a whole heap of them. Movement is one, music, all sorts of things. So, and people will find their own way with it. There's no one way. So Being Found will have these circles, and it will also have a longer sort of a 3-month program that we're going to start next year that will support people to go through with a group, so a smaller group that can get to know each other and stay in touch after the program if they'd like to, and really a deep dive into all the different ways we might want to integrate and then sharing with the group along the way. So for me, that feels like a really important part of the ecosystem, because I don't know. It's we're on this journey. We're on this journey of life. It doesn't end at the end of your last therapy session. It's an ongoing process, and I think really integrating means developing ways of being and practices that connect you to what you've learned, who you're becoming, who you are, what you are, how you want to be in the world. In a consistent way, so that you can continue to move from that place rather than the old place that got you so stuck or that was so difficult or so painful.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, thank you. It's great to hear about that, because, when we were first working on our trial, there wasn't very many people coming out of trials. There wasn't very many trials working with psychedelic medicine, but now there are many in Australia. And also with the rescheduling, there's going to be more and more people who are able to access this medicine or this psychotherapy with medicine kind of, there's going to be more and more people looking for that longer term integration. So it's great to hear that you are looking at offering some of that.
This is not just necessarily a smooth journey, and there might be beautiful points of celebrating and joy and really wonder, but it's acknowledging that any kind of transition and transformation is it's also uncomfortable, and we need to be with others, and we need to just be able to be in that, whatever that is, and have a laugh about it sometimes, or a cry about it, or whatever's there about it, and that's a really important thing that is, to me, different to going to a therapist.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think it's also about having people to be with you in the wonder of it too. Right?
Yes.
I remember a conversation with a participant that we had that they really wanted to be able to share that with people who really understood.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so it's not, and otherwise you can feel a little bit lonely,
It can.
And so I think these spaces are really important, and we're going to need them going forward. So it's great to hear on the horizon. Yeah, it feels like this is a nice way to kind of close off the conversation, to think about longer term integration. That feels like quite a natural space. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you really want to share before we wrap up for today?
Just one thought, which is sort of this taking the mystery out of it, right? Or putting the mystery into it, maybe both. I just think this sort of question about what is this black box of psychotherapy, what's actually happening there, and why it's so difficult to answer. And I think, our ways of measuring things and understanding things are quite reductionist, right? Like if you think of a trial, it's okay, well, let's have these elements, this presentation. We're trying to get as much consistency as we can. And it has its place, and I think it's useful. But I also think, in a way, it's like a totally different language to what's actually happening in the room. So we're trying to measure something that is in one language with, I don't know if language is the right, it's like trying to use a hammer to cut a piece of wood. Like it's just really confounding in a way. And I think this is probably a big reason as to why the therapy feels so mysterious, because we're trying to reduce it down to, okay, so you start there, you do this, that happens, then this, and that's just not what we are. We're just not that. We are very complex living beings. And so, and I guess this is probably coming through in our conversation a lot, this really responsive, multifaceted way of being and working that is necessary when you're talking about, being a human being and working with human beings. And I think measuring that, making it more sort of consistent or whatever it is, it's like there is consistency in what we're doing, but it's coming from this other way of being that is actually more in line, I think, with Indigenous ways of being, ways of working with with these things. And I think there's something really right in that, and so I guess that's something I've been wrestling with, is like, well, how do we, because it's a concern for me, in Australia with the legalization and people moving to clinical practice, that there, and within the medical system that we have and way of thinking that we have, and I can totally see how this is going to fit into that rather than that expanding into a different way from this experience. And so that feels important, just to recognize that that's the task ahead in a way. And it's also the opportunity. And if I look, like around the world at all the different things going on in the world and all the different challenges we're facing as a species and all our kind of whole context right now is calling us to that level of integration, that level of responsiveness, and not to work just from one point of view and one kind of cultural way of being, but to look at what are we as a species? What does it mean to be human? And how do we rise to the challenges that we are faced with, whether that's individually or collectively, and we need everything for that. We need everyone for that. We need all these different ways of being and knowing and working. And so, I mean, that's my great hope, right? That's my great hope. And that is what I strive for, because I feel like it's important for us, not only in therapy, but just in the world in general. And I think it's a great risk that we just keep reverting to, but this is our way of knowing, and so therefore we'll do this. And I think, this work is just incredibly humbling. And I think, and I think anyone that's not humbled by it is probably too much in a sense of, knowing best or something. It's like, this is incredibly humbling, and we should be humbled by it over and over again. And we should be shaped by it, actually, as therapists, as well as by that humbling,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, my hope for this work is that as I really agree with what you're saying, that it kind of opens up the field of healing from distress into something that's so much wider than the reductionist approach that we have had in the dominant discourse around the medical model. And I think it feels like if you're really here and you're witnessing someone go through this process, for thinking about the trial that we worked on, and everybody had fit the criteria for generalized anxiety disorder, but they were all different humans. Every single one. Everyone was the same, but they all were so different. And so, of course, it just makes so much sense to me that we need to approach it in a holistic way. Okay. I think we should start to draw to a close, but I just want to say as well before that, we've referenced a few different names and different topics, and I will, in the show notes, I'll put some links to some of Mindal's books and some books on IFS and resources for people who are interested in finding out a bit more about those modalities, and also links where they can find some more information out about you and your new project.
Thanks, Esme.
No problem. Thank you so much. Thanks again, Sarah, for coming along today. And
thanks for having me. It's been so wonderful.
Yeah, I feel like we could keep going. And I'm sure that I hope that this is the first of several conversations that you and I will have about this work. There's so many more areas that I'd love to dive into. There's things around self-care for therapist practitioners. There's probably, we could have talked even longer about longer term integration as well. It'd be nice to get more of that. But I think this is enough for today. So thank you so much. And
thank you.
I will speak to you again soon.
Thank you.